it's perfectly reasonable for people to expect the government to be able to do something about that, to prevent people from entering the country via small boat or by stowing away on lorries, taking these dangerous routes. The only issue is it is a very difficult challenge to be met, with hundreds of kilometres of viable coastline from which these boats can leave France. And this is something that the government is experiencing, with a high amount of money being sent to France to try to tackle these entries. The big question, of course, is whether this new Rwanda deal will represent good value for money. Some critics have argued, well, we can learn from the Australian case here, where the per-person cost of actually processing someone's claim offshore estimated to be hundreds of times more than processing them in local Australian communities.
Yeah, and I suppose there is that very difficult cost to quantify, isn't there, which is, if it does indeed act as a deterrent, that per-person cost that we're seeing at the minute, we can't quantify that going forward, can we? Because it may result in fewer and fewer people actually arriving in this country and therefore fewer people being sent over to Rwanda. Do you think if it does act as a genuine deterrent, then it would be saving this country money in the long run?
Not necessarily. And again, we look to the example provide these services to asylum seekers in the UK, in local communities where we have the infrastructure. And the Australian case showed that actually exporting this abroad brings very high operational costs. Of course, the question is, will it have a deterrent effect? There have been real questions raised about that, in part because the capacity of the Rwandan facility, perhaps it will be a few hundreds, but if small boat crossings continue in the thousands or tens of thousands, that suggests the probability of being sent to Rwanda will be quite small, and that will figure into the calculation made by these immigrants.
Look, you live and breathe this stuff, OK? And so the Rwanda thing is a very on-the-nose attempt by the government, I suspect more to appease swathes of the British population than it is maybe to have much of a practical impact on it. You've just highlighted some very practical issues with it there. I know it's a very complex issue, but you are an eminent mind on this issue. How do we sort it out, then? Because if the small boat crossings don't stop, right, then, as you've rightly said, Rwanda or no Rwanda, we're still in a bit of trouble, I suppose, when it comes to these illegal crossings. So I am asking you now, live on TV, to solve this problem for the nation.
Yeah, it is a very difficult problem. The other part of the government's strategy is enforcement. So it pours a lot of money into policing the French border. That does prevent thousands, if not the low tens of thousands of departures. Of course, they still continue in their thousands. So what some NGOs and charities have suggested is an entirely different approach to actually allow people to claim asylum abroad, perhaps at a British embassy, because as things are at present, to claim asylum in the UK, you have to be on UK mainland. If you allow people to claim asylum at British embassies abroad, then in theory that would obviate the need for these migrants to take this dangerous trip.
But sorry, I know I'm getting shouted at here, apologies to everyone in the gallery, but just on that issue, I think that's really important, because if we had offshore processing, and by that I mean in different countries, right, as you suggested there, could that actually result in fewer people coming to this country? Because presumably we could say no to more people, or the length of time it took us to decide on this could be longer abroad, whereas right now there's an argument to say it's encouraging more people to come by virtue of the fact they can only apply for asylum here.
And those are the arguments. It might result, there might be a trade-off here. It might result in fewer unauthorised, unofficial arrivals. But then the government has held, and it has argued this, and that's why there is not much support within government, as far as we know, for this policy. There is the concern that it would actually make it easier for people to claim asylum and therefore lead to more asylum applications.
Yeah.
These things are notoriously difficult to predict.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.